Welcome to the Vera show, where testimony, reality and truth meet you at the front door. Perspective to propose. Politics, religion, we talk about the real world we live in. Let's talk about it. Let's talk about it on the Vera show. From purpose, uplift, encourage, inspire, motivate, and let's talk about it on the Vera show. The Vera show.
And some of the words that I hear them say is, I want to feel free. I want to feel open. I want to feel secure, right? So a lot of those words are deep down inside of them, but they don't have a pathway to get there. And everything that, all the other information they get is, well, do this and do this and do this and do this. And they're like, I can't take on anything else. So once we're able to establish that level of safety, we start to unpack some self-compassion, which that is such an important element of living into your whole self. That full acceptance, that self-love, making sure that we're not abandoning ourselves for the sake of success and how society may view it, or even how you've internalized success. But we have to start with that level of safety. And once we've experienced some of that self-compassion and looking at things through a different lens, then we're able to connect to our authentic joy, which so many women in this situation, when you're experiencing burnout, you're not thinking about, oh, what's the next fun activity that I can do? Or what's gonna make me feel alive? And how am I gonna feel in the flow? You're so far from that point. So through the Tiny Challenge, we're able to start to identify times in our lives where we have felt authentic and we have felt fulfilled, because those neuronal wirings are already there. We just tend to overlook them. So when we bring them to the consciousness, then we're able to look through even just mundane tasks and activities through a new lens. So it's not adding more to-dos, but it's shifting a perspective once we've been able to establish that baseline of safety and self-love.
So good, so good. So can you share us a bit more about the kinds of women that go into your Tiny Challenge?
Hello.
Hi, Vera. So glad to be here with you today.
I am so excited that you're here with me today. And I'm going to take a few minutes to share with our audience a little more about Dr. Katy Wagner. She is a neuroeducator, trauma-informed coach, and founder of Iris Pathway, where she helps high-achieving women heal burnout, rebuild trust in themselves, and reclaim their lives after stress and trauma, big and small. After surviving a near fatal ski accident in 2017, Dr. Katy discovered that lasting healing isn't about pushing harder, isn't about regulating the nervous system and healing across the mind, body, emotions, and spirit. Blending neuroscience with scientifically grounded biofield modalities like Reiki and sound healing, she's the creator of the Stride framework and Reset to Rise. And her upcoming book is now open for waitlist signups, and we will talk more about that. Now, I would like for you to share with us a little bit about your childhood, how it impacted you, and how you are led into this journey that you are now on.
Yeah, I would love to. So my story is not the cliche story that I experienced a ton of trauma as a kid and I've risen above that. In fact, my growing up, I always felt was pretty blessed. I grew up in a family of four. It was my dad, my mom, my sister. My parents actually did divorce, but it wasn't until I was in high school, college time. And so the memories that I think about growing up are going horseback riding with my family and mountain biking racing with them and just having incredible experiences camping and doing a ton of arts. So I grew up as a musician. I started tap dancing and voice when I was 3 years old. My mom was a pageant mom. So my sister and I both did pageants growing up as well. And I started taking piano lessons when I was about 10 after going through my elementary music program. And I had a talent for piano. And I started taking piano lessons with a former concert pianist, which I still to this day have no idea how she ended up in my small town in Southern California. But by the time I started studying with her, she was already bedridden with rheumatoid arthritis. And I only saw her in her hospital bed, laying down next to her grand piano in her living room with her hands crumpled up, sipping on a cup of water. And every time I sat down at her piano, I felt an intense fear. And it was fear that I was going to let her down. It was fear that I was going to make a mistake. It was fear that I didn't know what she was going to say to me. If I hadn't practiced that week, was she going to yell at me? Because she had an incredible ear. She could listen to me play an entire sonata and then tell me afterwards, after a period of silence, you played the fourth finger instead of the third finger on the 15th measure of this movement.
Ooh.
Right? Like her ear was just perfectly attuned. And that type of teacher that I had really shaped how I approached achievement. It challenged me, which to me was like, yeah, let's go. I like a challenge. And I actually won a statewide competition in Los Angeles when I was 12 years old. And she was the very first phone call that I made after I won that competition. And I said, Miss Steinbach, I won. And there was silence. And then I was waiting for it, right? Even from across the phone lines, 3 hours away, she said, what's next? And I said, I go to the national competition. And she said, well, we have our work cut out for us, don't we?
Wow.
And that was the kind of messaging that I was getting, was if I wanted to perform at a high level, I need to just go all in. And over time, and as I reflect back on those types of experiences, I realized that, at no point did I feel like those were traumatic memories, but they shaped how I viewed myself. They shaped how I approach achievement and how I would push myself to overwhelm trying to get that validation. And so those types of experiences in my youth really impacted how I showed up as a college student, how I showed up as a wife, how I showed up as a mother, how I showed up as a doctoral student, even how I showed up as an educator. And so that took a lot of reflection and integration and healing myself while still honoring that relationship. Her picture still hangs above my piano to this day. It's still there. It's been there every year since she passed away when I was in high school.
Oh, wow. So would you say that even though it sounds like you had a wonderful childhood, but that experience with her in many ways caused a little bit of trauma for you.
Yeah. And when we talk about trauma, sometimes we refer to it as big T and small t. Like a big T event may be a severe car accident, or in my case, in 2017, I fell off of a cliff and I broke my neck. That's a big T, right?
You broke your neck?
I did. I broke my neck and my back falling off of a cliff in a skiing accident.
And
So
you're
that was
walking now?
No, I was skiing down. It was actually 10 minutes after my husband proposed and we became separated. And I took a turn I thought I could handle, and I found myself tumbling down a cliff. And thank goodness for Mount Hood Ski Patrol and my husband, because they are absolutely incredible and they saved my life. And they even won National Ski Patrol awards for my rescue because of how technical the rescue was. And so I'm still in contact with them, even to this day, 9 years later, and send happy birthday messages and connect with them. So there's big T events like that. Another big T event. So my father is a Vietnam veteran, and he was in a combined action platoon. So their job was to live in the villages and help and become part of the village and make close friends and associations. And then at night, they would go on patrol and make sure that the enemy was not coming into the village. Those types of events created big T for my dad. And I grew up as a kid seeing pictures of my dad as an 18-year-old standing over his kills. Now, so when I say I had a lovely childhood growing up, that's not to say that I wasn't exposed to other people's traumas either. But seeing those pictures didn't create a trauma in myself, right? Sometimes if it's over time, like vicarious trauma or first responder trauma, the more you're exposed to it, it can kind of fester. But it did become traumatic for my father. So he had a mountain biking accident and broke his back when I was in high school. And that stress and the shift in his identity that happened after that accident triggered PTSD from Vietnam. And so there was one day that I was coming home from high school, walking down our street, and my dad was in a fugue state, believing he was still in Vietnam and was patrolling our neighborhood like it was the village. And I had to take on a persona of a villager and get him to walk home so that he would find safety.
Wow.
Now, that is a memory and an experience that I had, but it wasn't traumatic for me.
Right.
Because I saw how he was navigating his experiences, and I was showing up as myself and doing what I could as a 16-year-old girl trying to keep her dad safe, right? So those types of experiences, like those are big T's, but the small T's are those experiences that are stressful for us, that often will shake our identity to their core, or that just feel so overwhelming, or we just keep hearing this message over and over and over again. And then it's the meaning that we make out of those experiences that creates the small trauma, right?
Mm-hmm. Now, I know we were talking earlier. We had such a great conversation before this show started. And there were several things that you shared. And because you are a divergent or a neuroeducator dealing also with divergent clients, for lack of a better word, can you share, first of all, as a neuroeducator, what does that mean? And second of all, dealing with divergent people, tell us more about that as well.
Of course. For clarification, neuroeducation is an intersectionality of a few different fields. It's cognitive psychology, so a study of the mind and how we think. It's neuroscience, which is the science of the brain, which includes the neurochemistry that happens, the biology, the different chemical impacts that exist when we are experiencing different learning situations, and then education, which is the science of learning, specifically how we learn. And there's a really unique approach to that in which I'm trained, which is neurosemantic language learning theory. And that's basically a big fancy term for
Yes, it is.
there's a few different levels to how we learn. And when we dial it back, we can think about, how do we learn that a cat is a cat? Right? If we break it all the way down to some basic learning. Well, the first thing that we need to do, if we have our vision intact, is we are taking in information from our environment in the forms of light and dark, right? That's a very, very basic level. So we see a contrast between the let's say it's a black cat, between a black cat and the lightness of the environment, right? That's the very first level. Then the second level is we start to make out shapes. So is it rounded here? Is it sharp here, right? Maybe a sharp ear and a rounded backside. So we start to layer on shapes on top of the light and the dark. Once we have that in place, then we start to layer on some other elements like texture. Maybe it's fur, right? Maybe it's a wet nose. We start to pick up on more pieces of information from our environment. And then we finally get to the language stage where we put a label on it. A cat in English is not a cat in Japanese, right? We use different languages to define them, but we all have some type of label that we put on that collection of data that we've just taken in. When we have done that, in neuroscience, we say that we have learned. We have learned what a cat is. Now, if a kid learns that that is a cat, then they can look at a tabby cat and they're like, but is that a cat? Because it's orange. That doesn't match up with my idea of what a cat is. So now what we have to do is we have to run through those levels again. Well, is it the same dark and light? Okay, roughly. Is it the same shape? Is it the same kind of texture? Oh, well, that's a cat too. So now I have learned that my concept of cat could be a yellow cat or an orange cat. It could be a black cat. It could be a white cat, right? And so we learn over time. So when we talk about neuroeducation, it's taking how we learn, the science behind how we're actually learning, the neurons that are connecting and the action potentials that have to be reached. That's the energy component. And then how we think about it, right? What does it mean? And so being a neuroeducator is incredible because I get to take expertise in all three of those areas and bridge them together. And they often don't speak the same language in those three different fields. So there's a little bit of translation that has to happen in order to make it apply. So using that wide diversity of experience, then it's really helpful to apply to my clients, which a number of them, as I mentioned earlier, are neurodivergent. And that has been a pretty popular word in the last 20 years, right? Basically an umbrella term to say anyone's cognitive abilities that are outside of the norm, right? And we're not saying that it's bad. There's no judgment on it. And we're not saying that it's good, right? But we're saying that there is a spectrum of socially accepted norms and what we expect in research to be the norms, if we're talking science, right? And so neurodivergent is you're just somewhere else along that spectrum, right? But it's not, again, not a judgment either way. So it may be that it's neurodivergent in how you think and process information. Maybe it's neurodivergent in how you are processing senses. So sensory perception disorders or processing disorders. It may be autism. And we know that autism is a spectrum. So it could be somewhere along there. ADHD is another spectrum. So whether it's been diagnosed as ADD or ADHD, and there's been a lot of changes in recent history around how we diagnose that. And again, I am not a psychologist, not a psychiatrist. I don't do any diagnosing. But I myself have ADHD, as does my daughter, and likely my son, because he's showing a lot of the same symptoms. My father also had ADHD.
Okay.
And so I understand how that shows up in the work that we do, in how we perceive ourselves, in the stories that we tell ourselves. And so the clients that I work with that are neurodivergent, they tend to feel safe when working with me because I understand those different levels.
Let's break down ADHD.
Mhm.
And I want you to kind of talk about, because that is such a it's a diagnosis that has become normalized,
Mhm.
for lack of a better way of putting it. So when we talk about ADHD, and I've experienced it with my son as well, and in all honesty, I think I may have it too, but I've never been diagnosed. So can you kind of talk about some of the divergence of ADHD and why it is on the spectrum for neurodivergency?
Mhm. Yeah. ADHD is, like you said, very common now. And there's a lot of ideas as to why people think it's more common. My dad was first diagnosed in the early 90s. And I remember he took me to a psychologist because he thought I had ADD at that time. And I was in middle school, high school, and I pushed back. I said, no, 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 you're not going to label me. You're not going to label me. And I remember doing a sorting activity, and it was like different colored blocks. And this is early diagnosing at the time. And she said, okay, I want you to sort out all of the greens and all the blues and all the pinks. And so sort them by color and do it as fast as you can. And she started timing me. And I started sorting and sorting and sorting. And I finally said, okay, I'm done. Now, keep in mind, I was a high achiever. I needed to do this perfectly. I knew I
Right.
was smart enough to do this assignment. And as soon as I said I was done, she looked at it and said, nope, that's wrong. And I thought, what? What? What do you mean it's wrong? And she said, look at the greens. And I looked, and I had not sorted out some different shades of green. And so she had said that is one of the clues to a diagnosis at the time. So the reason for that, when I looked back on that, was that ADD sometimes presents with patterns of inattention. So there may be rushing through activities, not paying attention to details, some impulsivity, some forgetfulness, losing things, right? Poor time management. My daughter, oh my goodness, that was one of the big ahas with her diagnosis, was just no concept of time whatsoever. We could put in all sorts of, the color timers to try to mark it down and give visual cues, which are usually very helpful. But it just was not in her attention field, being easily distracted. Some of the hyperactivity symptoms could be fidgeting or difficulty sitting still or acting without thinking, that impulsivity or interrupting people, because the brain tends to be moving a million miles a second. What's really interesting about ADHD is that there are a number of famous people who have just been known as being brilliant minds. And when we reflect back on it and we look at how they're demonstrating, how they're presenting, a lot of them could be diagnosed with ADHD in the way that we define it. And there's some different theories around that their brain is just firing on all cylinders all the time, which allows for some incredible, brilliant, innovative ideas. There's so much creativity there. And then there's sometimes that creativity just gets blocked because there's so much firing off all the time that the execution of their idea doesn't come to fruition. So there's different regulation that comes into play. Their ability to plan ahead can be more challenging. Their ability to emotionally regulate can be more challenging because they're taking in so much information and then trying to sort it all out as fast as they possibly can and then actually do something with it. So along that spectrum, right? It's keep in mind there's some people that is hugely impactful in their daily life and require a lot of different supports to be successful. There's others that have learned skills not requiring medication that have used different modalities to manage some of these symptoms that can be a little annoying or frustrating or can create some challenges, but they are able to manage it in different ways. So again, there's a wide spectrum there, but it doesn't fit into necessarily the norm, which is why
Right.
it's called divergent.
But the one thing about ADHD, and I believe studies have shown that many people that have ADHD are brilliant people, very intelligent people. And so just because you have this divergence, it has nothing to do with your intellect and your ability to achieve. You just do it differently.
Mhm.
And medication seems to be the way that people want to go. But here we are with Dr. Katy, and she has another way to deal with different divergence. ADHD in particular, especially given you have been diagnosed, you have 2 children that are diagnosed. So can we talk about some of the modalities and some of the things that you have learned yourself, taught yourself, and now coach others on?
Mhm. Yeah. Like I shared, I grew up with a father who had PTSD. And then just in the last couple of years, my mother also had a psychiatric response to her husband passing away, which is another big trauma. But it manifested psychiatrically. And then my own experience with having ADHD and also a generalized anxiety disorder, I knew that it's not that there's something wrong with me or wrong with them, but there was a disturbance in how we were processing information, which is energy. We are all made up of energy. And I spent
Yes.
years working as a science teacher. So I taught middle school and high school science for a number of years. And I was originally studying to go into medicine, but neuroscience was always kind of a draw for me. So I was really excited when my doctoral program was able to integrate that. So there is some really phenomenal new approaches coming out of Harvard University in their psychiatry department, which there's a book written by Christopher Palmer called Brain Energy. And it's exploring how are the energy exchanges that happen at the brain body level, right? And how energy is metabolized and how that connects to our mental health. And, obviously not going into it in a super high level, but it's a better understanding of how we are constantly interacting with our environments, how we're constantly interacting with our own thoughts and our own beliefs that develop over time, or even some beliefs that we just inherit from our families of origin. And it just is happening in the background and we're not even really sure what's happening, right? But understanding that at its root level, any of those disorders are actually disturbances in how energy is processed.
Now, when you talk about, because I equate energy with spirit.
Mm.
And I equate it as such because we're just living in a mortal body. And we are comprised most of that energy, that spirit that really dictates everything about us. Would you not say?
Spirit plays a huge role in my approach in working with clients because my approach is integrative. And when we talk about energy from more of a scientific,
Okay.
psychiatric perspective, energy, or even, basic high school physical science, right? Energy, right? There has to be some type of energy exchange in order to affect some kind of result, right? So let's take the example of two neurons. Let's say I have a little neuron, which is a brain cell here, and I have another brain cell over here. Well, I have a thought that's coming to mind, and the thought exists in the connection between those two neurons. But in order to get them to connect, something has to happen. There has to be some type of inertia that's going on to connect them. And so, from a chemical perspective, there's a lot of different chemicals that are interacting in that neuron. There has to reach what's called an action potential. And it's this point at which there's enough of that energy that is being released to go across this almost like a hill, right? And once it's able to go across that hill, it connects to the other neuron. They fire together. Oh, we have a thought, right? So anytime we're having thoughts, anytime we're making meaning of an experience, anytime we are processing our emotions, there's a huge amount of energy that is moving around in our body. And you've probably experienced that. If you've ever had a really good cry, you tend to feel physically exhausted afterwards because there's been such a huge release of energy and you're feeling that in your body, right? So when we think about energy from a spiritual perspective, like being filled with the energy of spirit, and not, there's a wide variety of religious backgrounds that I work with. Some are, Pentecostal Christian, others are Wiccan, others are atheist, right? It's non-denominational is my approach. It's about the meaning that you place behind it. So when I talk about spirit, it could be your spiritual connection to your higher power or to your source. It could be your, silver cord to the interconnectedness of all of consciousness, however you want to dig into that, right? But at its core, I feel like the spiritual domain is about living your purpose. And it's your soul essence and your life essence, which are not always the same thing. And so being able to understand the difference between your soul and your life essence.
Let's talk about that. Share it.
Yeah. So your soul essence is what you are drawn to that connects you to all that is, right? Whether you like it or not, we are all connected as humans on this planet. Any decision that I make has a ripple effect to other people. My dissertation, my doctoral dissertation, was around mindfulness of teachers and the impacts that had on student outcomes. Because Dan Siegel does a lot of work around interpersonal neurobiology. It's this idea that there's an energetic exchange between people. And so when we are living in community, we are connecting and having impacts on other people. So we're all connected, like 13 degrees of Kevin Bacon, right? We're all connected in some way. So when we're living into our soul essence, it's what fills up my soul. What is it that drives me to wake up and open my eyes every morning? What is going to make me feel like at the end of the day, if I'm sitting on a rocking chair on my patio, am I going to be like, this was the life? Like, I'm so glad I lived that life. That's what the soul purpose and soul essence is.
But, unfortunately, there are so many people that are disconnected from their soul essence, that purpose, that passion. How can we help them understand and get to that? And that's probably an hour-long plus answer, but if you could just capsulize, how because that soul essence is so important. That, and it reminds me of the scripture that says, I knew you before you were born. I knew the plans I had for you. And in my opinion, that's what that soul essence is. We were designed with purpose, and that purpose leads to our passion. So and I know you've got it. I know you've got it, but how do we help people understand how important that is, and how, because we're talking about stress and trauma and all those things, and how we relate, react, and respond to the stresses and the traumas in our lives can impact on that soul essence.
Our life essence or life purpose tends to be the expectations we place on ourselves, the goals that we set. I want to be married. I want to have kids. I want to have a successful career. We set all of those goals along our life, and we tend to measure our success as a person by our ability to achieve those life purpose, right? But you're exactly right. The soul purpose tends to get skipped in that holistic healing approach when we are constantly focused on, well, I need to achieve my next SMART goal, because that becomes the trap of the overachiever. The overachiever then views their achievement based on what society then gives them as far as information goes, right? But it's the attachment to that achievement that's the problem. It's not the achievement itself. So when we hold on to that life purpose so much that we avoid the soul purpose, it's easy for us to just melt down if things get too much, right? We don't have a lifeline that keeps us moving towards our purpose. That's where we tend to see a lot of burnout. That's where we tend to see a lot of identity crises. I remember as a kid hearing about, oh, well, when my parents are in their 40s, they're going to go through a midlife crisis. And I'm thinking, oh gosh, I'm almost 50. When was my midlife crisis? So that those tend to happen because we have not filled up our soul purpose cup. We've let it run dry. And there is a really great message that a Hopi elder shared at a message at United Nations. And I want to make sure I remember this correctly. He said, the elders say we must let go of the shore, push off into the middle of the river, keep our eyes open and our heads above the water. Banish the word struggle from your attitude and your vocabulary. All that we do now must be done in a sacred manner and in celebration.
Wow.
We are the ones we've been waiting for.
Wow. I love that.
And when we reflect on the power of saying we are the ones we've been waiting for, that gives us that agency, that gives us the power, that sense of inner safety, the sense of connection to all that is there, without discounting that, maybe that river is raging and that can be a little scary. But when we release that attachment to the shore, which is all those, the life goals that we set, which we still need to keep those and keep them going. But when we release that attachment to those and we approach our life in a sacred way that fills our soul, that is when we really feel enlightened and fulfilled and authentic and truthful to ourselves. That's where the power really lies.
But how do you get to that?
Yeah. So one of the ways that I work with my clients is through a framework that I developed called the STRIDE framework.
Yes.
Because when we get stuck in setting those goals in that achievement trap, we really feel stuck. And we need to establish a stride again to get movement, to get forward momentum, to get that inertia, to get the energy flowing again. And STRIDE is an acronym that stands for 4 different words. The first is stabilize. Our nervous system is specifically designed if we are perceiving threat, whether it's real or perceived, it could be a lion chasing you, or it could just feel like, oh my gosh, I'm going to completely bomb my corporate presentation, right? Anytime our brain processes it the same way, it's a threat. Then our body moves into survival mode. So if we're living in survival mode, we're not accessing our higher order thinking skills. We're not accessing communication tools, right? It's just we're not just on fire. We're running away, right? Or we're freezing, or we're fighting, or we're people pleasing. That's another way that we respond in those types of situations. So the first step is we have to stabilize that. If we don't stabilize, if we don't have that foundation, we're like dead in the water, right? Because we biologically cannot access some of the other incredible tools and experiences and thoughts and beliefs that we have in the rest of our brain. And that is purely out of protection. And it's a great strategy. It keeps us alive, but it doesn't help us live to be living our best life, right? So we need to stabilize, and we do that through a couple of different modalities, through different breath work. So I'm a Reiki master in 2 different traditions. And I mentioned I was also a musician. And so I did a lot of work around psychophysics of pitch and frequency. And so I use a lot of sound healing in my work as well, because that helps shift brain waves. And so using those types of energetic modalities to get us back into our body, to get us feeling safe and connected, so our basic needs are met. And I think like that video, I think the very first one talked a little bit about safety and connection, right?
Yes.
Those instinctual needs have to be met in order for us to stabilize. So that's step number 1. Second, we move into regulation. So once you've stabilized more of an acute situation, you need to figure out what is your baseline. And that's where we start to unpack some of these beliefs that we have developed or adopted over time, and where self-compassion comes in. So self-compassion has gotten a lot more awareness in some of the research around how demonstrating that compassion for others, we get told that all the time. Demonstrate empathy, demonstrate compassion for other people, but we never learn how to give that to ourselves. Instead, we feel like giving compassion to ourselves is making excuses or giving ourselves an out or not taking accountability. But it's not that at all. It's just we haven't learned how to demonstrate self-compassion.
And and the sad thing is, we would automatically assume that empathy and compassion is just an innate ability. But yet there are those who have no compassion, who have no empathy. Can you tell me about that, and how that falls in line with all the things that you do? And is that something you can teach? Can you teach empathy and compassion, really?
Definitely. Do you think that every soul that comes out of the womb like magically knows how to demonstrate empathy for other people?
But there's so many it feels innate to me to be that way. And yet there are people who, it's just like non-existent. And don't you have to have some type of will or desire to be that way in order to be that way?
There's a really interesting study about a young girl who they found after she had been kept in a, very, very traumatic situation, but she had been kept in a basement, not exposed to any human interaction, emaciated, barely kept alive, but not exposed to any kind of, compassion with other people or even language. Like learning language was one of their goals once they were able to get her out of that situation. And she was able to learn some words and phrases, but not at a very high level. And that's one of the foundational studies around how a failure to thrive experience happens, right? So if you are not in an environment of
Okay.
love and connection and safety, then you are not learning those feelings. You are not learning how to process that. And at the time when they were doing some of this early neuroscience research, they realized there's a distinct window of time when our brain cells start to prune away, because our brain is designed to be an efficient organ. If there's too much that's cluttered, it's not efficient. So it starts
Okay.
pruning them away. So when you're not exposed to that kind of
Okay.
empathy and compassion from an early
Okay.
age, where your brain starts to make sense and learning like, oh, this is how you treat people. Oh, this is how this person feels because I can see a smile on their face, right? We start to pick up information from other people. That's how we start to develop those skills. We just don't always put a name to it. And that's why
Okay.
it starts to feel innate.
Okay. So, in essence, what happens in our childhood dictates those kinds of things.
It certainly creates an environment that can be conducive to you learning those skills, or it can create an environment where it makes it incredibly challenging to develop those skills. So there's
Okay.
always been a battle of nature versus nurture, right?
Yes.
And there are some kids that may be born into an absolutely loving environment and they demonstrate love and compassion, and their child just cannot do it, right? That they're diagnosed with some type of a behavior disorder or
Okay.
neurodevelopmental disorder or even psychiatric disorders, and it gets to a point where this loving family is just, I don't even know how to parent my child. Like, I don't know what to do. And so even with an environment where you are creating that type of the modeling, right, and the co-regulation, there is an element of nature there that it's sometimes just harder for people to learn certain skills and pick up on human faces and emotions. And, that goes back to the whole spectrum of the human condition.
Yes.
So the power really lies in creating both the environment for people to thrive, but there is also the element of nature and genetics, because that is how we process energy, right? That is heavily influenced by genetics as well. So that's, again, why having an integrated approach and a holistic approach is so important, because there's no way for us to really pinpoint what the root is in the complexity of what it is to be human. We really need to approach it from a mind, body, emotion, spirit perspective to make sure that we're able to integrate all of that together and truly heal and live the life that we want.
Now, earlier before the show, we talked about that instinctive connectiveness. And I'm going to play this video where you're talking about an instance of that connectivity. So let me pull this up for
When
us.
we're first born, right? I don't know if you've ever heard about this, but this is incredible. When we are first born, if you are placed on the abdomen of your mother, you will actually crawl up to the breast and start nursing on your own. No one is dangling a carrot and saying, hey, baby, crawl up here. You do that instinctively because we have a basic need for connection and safety. If you put the baby on the floor, they're not going to start crawling as soon as they're born, right? But when you place them into a situation where they are driven instinctually, and as soon as they start nursing, we know that there's oxytocin that gets released in both the baby's brain and the mother's brain. So there's a neurological bonding that happens when we experience connection and safety. So in the Tiny Challenge, what we do is we work through what are the situations that are causing this overwhelm or this stress. Why are we in this state to start with, right? And we start to have a little bit better understanding of what would the ideal life be. And some of the words that I hear them say is, I want to feel free. I want to feel open. I want to feel secure, right? So a lot of those words are deep down inside of them, but they don't have a pathway to get there. And everything that all the other information.
Okay. Let's talk about this, because now you're talking about a tiny challenge, which I'm familiar with. This is one of your approaches in order for clients to better understand the work that you do with this tiny challenge. Now, how long are your tiny challenges?
So, what I have discovered in working with clients is that there's a lot of women, particularly who I particularly work with, that are overachievers that feel like, well, I'm functioning, but something feels off and I don't know what it is. And so I don't really know how to fix it or what it is that I need. And my whole purpose in Iris Pathway is to serve and help people live their best lives. And we can take a lot of different approaches to do that. And still within that framework. So the 5-day tiny challenge is an opportunity to, one, get to know me a little bit better, because if you don't feel safe and connected, right, like we just talked about in the video, then having trust to share some really vulnerable experiences and thoughts can be really challenging. And we're much less likely to invest in any kind of a program or coaching or reaching out if we don't feel that element of trust. So the 5 days allows that trust to be built in a safe and connected way, creating that environment. And so we go through 5 days so that you're able to get to know the framework a little bit better. You're able to walk away with some tools that can be applied either as you continue to work with me or even on your own to continue to improve your life. Obviously, if you're working with me and you have that support, you have that accountability, you're going to get there much faster than if you are just kind of, throwing spaghetti at the wall with a couple of different tools here and there, right?
Okay.
And I'm sure that all of us have done that at some point in our lives. For high achieving women, there is not a knowledge gap. It really is an implementation gap. So having someone who can walk the path with you, particularly someone who's been through a lot of those types of experiences, can be really, really valuable. So the 5 days is an opportunity for us to get to know each other so that you feel safe and connected and can achieve your goals much faster.
Okay. Now, I jumped from the video to asking you about the 5-day challenge because it was also mentioned in the video.
Yeah.
So that's why I wanted clarification on your 5-day challenge. And so this connectiveness that you talked about, and the fact that a baby, and when you place a child on your stomach, it's going to automatically rise to that source.
Mm-hmm.
And now, and I also want to talk about your book. I'm looking at the time and wanting to cover everything, but and we talked about so much even before the show. But tell us, I'm going to give you the floor before we start talking about this book, and let you expound more on that video that we just saw and that connectiveness, and why connectivity is so critical and important in all of us, and necessary given what's going on right now. You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. So I'm going to let you talk.
Yeah. Before the show, we talked a little bit about co-regulation, and this is a strategy that is so incredibly important to use with your spouse, with your kids, with your colleagues, with the person you happen to run across on the street who's a total stranger. But there's the idea that we don't have control over all of the variables in the world, no matter how much some people want that. That what we're holding on to, like I mentioned earlier, is this attachment, the attachment to the idea that I can have control. And if I lose that attachment, I'm out of control, and that doesn't feel safe. So when we realize, when we get all the way down to the very first instincts as we are coming into this world, is that we have an innate feeling of safety and connection. And we also have the drive to find it. So as soon as a baby starts nursing and is feeling safe, it's also supported neurochemically with oxytocin being released in both brains, right? There's a connection that is happening at a chemical level. So the co-regulation piece is so important that, if you are not regulated yourself, and if another person who may be in crisis is certainly not regulated, then what we know from any kind of resonance is they're going to meet up at some point, right? And if you have two very or dysregulated people that are going like this, as soon as those energies meet, it actually amplifies.
Yes.
So many arguments can start as a little disagreement and then go up, right? So, my husband has bipolar disorder, and when his mood is dysregulated, I know that I don't have control over that, but what I have control over is how am I showing up as a stabilized, regulated person with beliefs about what I deserve and how to set my boundaries. And when I show up in a calm state, that helps calm other people around me. I have another client that has a dysregulated daughter. And after she went through the 5 days, she said, "Oh my gosh, can you do this for teenagers too? Because this has been so powerful." And I said, whether or not I work with your teenager, you now have the skills to regulate yourself. So as a parent, you can start demonstrating those skills, and that will help them regulate, whether they have the language or the actual technical skills or not. So,
Beautiful.
so that co-regulation is so important, but the only thing you have control over is
Yes.
yourself.
Exactly. And that's something I want to emphasize. We have no control over how other people relate, react, and respond. We don't have that kind of power. The only control that we have is how we relate, react, and respond. And so, as Dr. Katy was saying, if you are in a situation where the other individual has no control over their reactions and how they're relating and how they're responding, or they don't know how to regulate themselves, you have the tools to help a parent, a coworker, a husband, or a wife to be able to regulate themselves through various modalities. One of which you mentioned earlier was the breathing, and so we've got 3 minutes left. So I need for you to share some of the modalities, because I think this is very important, because so often we become reactionary to how other people are behaving when we need to learn how to regulate ourselves first so that we can, in fact, help the other person to look at regulating themselves. So can you kind of talk about that? We've got 2 minutes.
Yes.
So
I mentioned control, and control often it creates a belief that if I am in control, I am safe. But what actually creates freedom is surrender for that control or that attachment. Now, what that means is that you have to find that safety in some other way. There has to be an internal sense of safety. So to stabilize, the very first step, some of the modalities that we use is breathing, because that is a way to anchor into your body. When you shift your focus of the worry of the past or the resentment or the anxiety of the what ifs of the future, you're not present in your body now. And so going through a couple of different breathing exercises, whether it's box breathing, like 4x4, or whether it's a 4-7-8, like Dr. Weil talks about, there's different breathing strategies that you can use with the intention of getting back into your present body now. There's also, Dan Siegel talks about a wheel of awareness, which is another great tool to come into your awareness of the present moment. So any types of modalities that get you back into now are incredibly important. I also teach a couple of neurolinguistic programming techniques specifically around anchors. So it may be a scent that brings you back to a current positive memory or the present. Maybe it's a hand squeeze that can be really quiet. No one knows that you're doing it, but it's actually an anchor to get you back into that state. So any type of physical anchors to help your brain remember now is what you do have control over and where you feel safe, and you can surrender everything else. That is where you find freedom.
That's awesome. And we ran out of time, but I did bring your book up, but then I took it down because we were talking about something else. But let me pull it up. And also I put what you indicated just now.
So the book I actually started during COVID because I felt like there was so much of my life that was finally starting to come together and start to make sense for myself. And so I started writing this several years ago. But it blends both the science. I mean, we're talking about reticular activating system. We're talking about a lot of different technical pieces, but it also has a lot of great strategies and practices and tools to use. But it really takes you through a journey of how we experience our lives, the beliefs and the meanings that we make out of it, and what that process has looked like for me throughout my life. So there's a little bit of personal storytelling there, both from my growing up and my experiences, but just like where it says Iris Pathway, blending the science and the holistic healing, it very much is that way. So whether you connect with it on a personal level or you dig more into the science or the strategies, there's something in there for everyone. So if you want to get on the wait list for the book, just visit irispathway.com and you can download a little freebie about how to be calm and confident, and you'll be placed onto the wait list for the book.
Yes. And let me pull that up. This is where you go. irispathway.com. Go there, get on the waiting list for the book, pull the download, the free gift that she has. And this is just, and there's so much more I want to talk about.
Well, maybe I'll come back on another show. I've absolutely loved being here.
Well, I love you being here. I kid you not. And there's just so much to uncover to help make a difference in people's lives, because we're going through so much and children are going through so much. We just gave you some ideas of things, how to regulate. And I thought I was typing it in, but I don't know where it went. So anyway, thank you so much for being here. It has been an honor and a privilege to have you here. And I am looking forward to you coming back. I am booked up through November, which I am just amazed at. But I want to get you back as soon as I can. And it may be the first of the year, which may be a good time to begin to talk about these things, to start the new year off regulating ourselves and helping others to regulate by showing them and modeling that process.
I love that. And I also have a couple of articles coming out to support people that are navigating trauma with the Trauma Survivor Network. So that will go a little bit more in depth into the STRIDE framework. So make sure you check out the Trauma Survivors Network as well.
Okay, awesome. Well, listen, Dr. Katy, I'm sorry. I had a Dr. Rita on a couple of days ago. But Dr. Katy, thank you so much. Thank you so much for being here. And I am going to pull you down, but don't leave, okay? Listen, thank you guys for listening, and catch the replay, share it with others. And also, I do want to say, if you are interested in helping support the Vera Thomas Show, you can do so by donating, by going to $instill great or Venmo at VT1117. Again, Cash App, $instill great, Venmo at VT1117. And with that, God bless you, and we will see you next week. Enjoy your weekend. It's not a holiday. Just enjoy your weekend. Treat it like a holiday. And God bless you. And we'll see you soon.
Let's talk about it on the Vera Show. The Vera Show.